There is a moment you probably know well. You are sitting in a room, maybe a restaurant, maybe an office, maybe someone's living room that should feel safe, and someone across from you is laughing too loudly. Their voice fills every corner. Their energy spills into your space without asking permission. And something inside you does not just feel annoyed, something inside you flinches. Not on your face, maybe. You have learned to keep your face still, but somewhere deeper, behind your ribs, something pulls inward, the way a sea anemone folds itself closed when it senses pressure from the outside world. You glance around, no one else seems bothered, people are nodding, smiling, joining in, and you sit there in the middle of all that noise, feeling like you are the only person in the world who can hear how loud it all is. That feeling. That specific, quiet, slightly lonely feeling. That is where this story begins, because it is not about being antisocial. It is not about hating fun, and it is certainly not about being broken. It is about something much older, much more layered, and much more worth understanding than most people ever take the time to tell you. So let us slow down together, let us sit with this. You probably have a reputation, whether you chose it or not. The quiet one, the serious one, the one who seems a little hard to read. People describe you as calm, which sometimes feels like a compliment and sometimes feels like code for something else, something they cannot quite name. You do not seek out crowds, but you can handle them when you need to. What exhausts you is not the number of people in a room, it is the volume of them. The way some people move through a space as if they own the air inside it, the way a loud laugh can knock you slightly off center, the way a person who talks over others can make you go quiet in a way that has nothing to do with not having something to say. You have things to say. You always have things to say. You just find yourself holding them back when the noise level rises, as if your voice is a candle and the loudness in the room is a wind, and you have learned somewhere along the way that it is easier to cup your hand around the flame than to fight the weather. You notice things other people miss, the flicker of discomfort on someone's face before they cover it with a smile, the moment a conversation shifts from genuine to performative, the way certain people get louder when they are actually saying less. You pick up on all of it, and carrying that much information, that much sensory and emotional data, is genuinely tiring in a way that is hard to explain to someone who does not feel it the same way. At parties, you find the one person who is standing slightly apart from the group, and you feel an immediate, wordless kinship. You measure the distance to the nearest quiet corner the way someone else might check for the nearest exit in a fire. Not because you are afraid, because you are managing, because you have always been managing. That is not a flaw, that is a strategy, and it came from somewhere. Here is where the psychology begins to surface, not as a diagnosis, not as a label, but as a mirror. You likely have what researchers call high sensory processing sensitivity. The term was first seriously studied in the 1990s by psychologist Elaine Aron, and it describes a trait found in roughly 15 to 20% of the human population. But before you let that number land as a statistic, let it land as this. Roughly 1 in every 5 or 6 people you have ever met processes the world with a nervous system that is fundamentally more responsive than average. More responsive does not mean more fragile. It means more tuned, like the difference between a standard radio and a high-frequency receiver. The high-sensitivity nervous system picks up signals that others simply do not register. Bright lights feel brighter, strong smells feel stronger, and sound, especially sudden, unpredictable, or emotionally intense sound, lands differently. It does not just enter through your ears. It enters through your whole body. This is not a metaphor. Neurological research shows that highly sensitive people demonstrate greater activation in brain regions associated with empathy, attention, and depth of processing, including the insula, the anterior cingulate cortex, and areas of the mirror neuron system. When you are in a loud environment, your brain is not just processing sound. It is processing meaning, tone, emotional subtext, and the felt sense of everyone in the room all at the same time. That is not weakness. That is a completely different kind of cognitive load. But here is where it gets more personal, because high sensitivity alone does not fully explain the flinch. It does not fully explain why loud people, specifically, feel like more than just a sensory inconvenience. It does not explain why, for some of you, certain kinds of loudness feel almost like a small violation. For that, we have to go a little further back. Think about the environment you grew up in. Not to assign blame, not to reopen anything that needs to stay closed right now, just to notice. Was loudness associated with safety or with something else? Was the raised voice in your childhood home a sign of celebration or a warning signal? Was the person who talked the most also the person who hurt the most? Was noise used as control, as dominance, as a way of filling a room so that no one else could take up space inside it? Because here is something that does not get said enough. For many sensitive people, the aversion to loudness is not just a trait they were born with, it is also a response that was shaped. Slowly, quietly, over years, the nervous system learned to associate volume with threat, and so it developed a reflex, an automatic internal retreat whenever the decibel level in the room goes up. Psychologists call this a conditioned threat response, which is a clinical way of saying that your body learned a lesson about loudness long before your mind had the language to name it, and the body does not forget. Even now, in a room that is objectively safe, in a conversation that is objectively fine, the old wiring still fires. The candle still wants to fold itself inward. This is where the pattern becomes more complex than it first appears, because it does not just show up in loud rooms. It shows up in your relationships in ways you might not have connected yet. You may find yourself drawn to partners or friends who are calm, measured, understated, and then quietly frustrated when they cannot match your depth. You may avoid conflict not because you lack conviction, but because the raised voices that conflict sometimes produces feel genuinely overwhelming, as if the argument itself is a sensory event you need to survive rather than navigate. At work, you may be the person who over-prepares, who writes detailed emails rather than making quick phone calls, who prefers the written word to the spontaneous meeting because writing gives you control over the noise. You may be underestimated in group settings because you do not perform your competence loudly, while someone less skilled but more vocally confident takes up more space and gets more credit. That is a real cost, not an imagined one. And in your relationship with yourself, something quieter and more painful may be happening. You may have internalized the cultural message that being sensitive is a liability, that you are too much and not enough at the same time, too reactive to the world, but not expressive enough in ways the world rewards. You may have spent years trying to be louder than you are, to be easier, to be the version of yourself that does not need the room to be quiet to feel okay. That costs something. Living at a frequency that is not yours costs something real. Take a breath here, just a breath, because what comes next is the part that is hardest to hold. You have probably been told, in some form or another, that your sensitivity is a problem to be managed, that you need to develop thicker skin, that the world is loud and you simply have to get used to it. And you have tried. You have tried so many times, in so many different ways, to turn down the volume of your own experience so that you could fit more comfortably into spaces that were never built with you in mind. And somewhere in all of that trying, something subtle happened. You began to disappear, just a little. Not all at once, not dramatically, but piece by piece, preference by preference, you began to edit yourself down to a version that caused less friction, a version that apologized for needing quiet, a version that laughed along when the loudness of the room made you want to leave, a version that stopped saying, "This is too much for me," because you had learned that saying so made you seem difficult, oversensitive, not a team player, not fun. Here is the honest truth, the kind that sits in the chest rather than the head. You were never too sensitive. The world was too loud, and instead of the world adjusting, you did, over and over. And the cost of all that adjusting was a quiet erosion of the trust between you and your own inner life. That is the real wound. Not that loud people bother you, but that somewhere along the way, you stopped fully believing that your need for quiet was legitimate. I used to think there was something wrong with me for needing so much stillness. That sentence lives in a lot of people. Maybe it lives in you. Now here is where the path begins to shift. Not fix, not resolve, shift. Because understanding where something comes from does not automatically change it. The nervous system does not rewire itself the moment you learn a new word for what it does. But understanding creates something valuable. It creates the first millimeter of space between you and the automatic response. It creates the possibility of a choice where, before, there was only a reflex. And that space, that single millimeter, is where everything begins. The work, if you want to call it that, is not about learning to tolerate loudness. It is not about forcing your sensitive nervous system to become something it is not. The work is about learning to trust yourself again, to stop treating your own experience as a problem and start treating it as information. Accurate, valid, even beautiful information about who you are and what you need. This looks different for everyone. For some people, it looks like finally naming the truth out loud, even just to themselves. Loud environments genuinely exhaust me, and that is okay. Not as an apology, not with a qualifier, just as a fact, the way someone states that they prefer cold weather, or that they function better in the morning than at night. For others, it looks like tracing the old wiring back to its source. Not to blame anyone, not to relive pain, but to understand the story the nervous system has been telling, and to gently, slowly begin to offer it a different one. The loud voice in the room today is not the loud voice from before. The crowded party is not the crowded household. The body does not always know the difference, not yet, but the mind can begin to help it learn. There is a concept in psychology called earned security. It describes the process by which someone who did not grow up with a secure, consistent emotional environment learns, over time and through intentional reflection and new relational experiences, to build that security from the inside out. It is not the same as the security you might have had if everything had been different, but it is real. It is hard-won, and it belongs to you in a way that nothing given freely ever quite does. You can earn that security, not by silencing your sensitivity, by befriending it. The quietest parts of me are also the truest. Something shifts when a sensitive person stops fighting their own nature. It is not a dramatic shift. You will not suddenly love loud parties or find yourself comfortable in chaos. But something inside settles. The way a room settles at the end of a long day, when the lights go low and the noise from outside finally fades and the space becomes, once again, yours, you may begin to notice that your sensitivity, the very thing you have spent years trying to manage, is also the source of some of your most extraordinary qualities. Your attunement to others, your ability to read a room, to sense what is unspoken, to hold space for complexity when others want simple answers, your deep appreciation for beauty in small things, a certain quality of light, the way a piece of music opens something in your chest, the rare conversation that feels like it is happening without any performance at all. These things are not separate from your sensitivity. They are your sensitivity. The gift and the weight are the same thing, and you do not get one without the other. There will still be loud rooms. There will still be people who fill every corner of a space with their voice and their energy, and their need to be the most present thing in it. And you will still sometimes feel the flinch, the quiet internal withdrawal, the reaching for the nearest corner of stillness. That is okay. You do not have to be cured of yourself. You do not have to arrive at a place where none of this affects you anymore. That is not healing. That is erasure. Real healing, whatever it looks like for you, is not the absence of the flinch. It is the moment after the flinch, when instead of spiraling into shame or self-criticism, you simply notice, oh, there it is again, the old response, the old wiring. I know what this is. I know where it came from.